So for this XML, when I think about alternative, this configuration you have to do under configuration class only. How you will configure this calendar object here? You need to use public method. Whatever object you require, right? That object should be your return type, calendar, and method name can be anything. You can put any method name, any name for your method. You can have any name. Your method name can be X, Y, Z, anything. And your method will not have any inputs. Okay, just a simple method without any inputs. And here you can write the code, normal code to create calendar object. Calendar C equal to new calendar, or calendar C equal to calendar dot new instance. Whatever code is required to you create the object. Use that code here. Simple core Java code only. Simple core logic only you should write here. Once done with that, return your object here. So just the core Java code only you should use to create object. Simple core Java logic only. On top of this method, just you need to mention at the rate bean annotation. Then whatever method you have, right? This method during loading time only. Like how while XML loading it will create calendar object, right? Whenever you load or whenever you start your application, first to focus for your Spring container is configuration class. First it will go to configuration class because many XML alternative configurations you have done here. So first it will go to configuration class. If you mention any method with at the rate bean annotation, immediately it will execute that method. It will execute this method. Immediately it will execute this method, and whatever code is executed here, right? After that code, you are returning one object. This object it will hold with along with your IOC container. This object it will hold along with your IOC container. Whatever object you manually created and returned, right? This object it will hold. Intentionally, if somebody try to call this method also, as it is available as a method, if somebody a junior developer joined, he don't know to get this calendar object, he thought that he need to call this any name method. Actually, doesn't require. Once you configure with this bean means this object is created and available in IOC context. Wherever you want to auto wire it, you can auto wire it. If somebody intentionally calls this any name method also, it will not create double objects. Again, it won't create any object. During first time application startup only, this method will execute. Later, intentionally, if you try to call this method 1,000 times also, this code it will not execute because it knows that this is pure alternate for bean. So during XML file loading only, this bean will be created, and only one time only one object will be created as a singleton object. Same principle they follow here. This also will execute only one time during loading time. Your configuration class at the rate bean methods will execute only once. Whatever object is created and returned here, right? That it will hold with IOC. Same thing happening here. Whatever object you are requesting, it will create and it will hold with IOC. Same here also it will hold this with IOC. So this object as it is holding with IOC, you know how to auto wire that. We can able to auto wire this object wherever is required. Same thing. We can able to auto wire this object wherever we require. Are you able to follow me? Yeah. You can do that. Multiple times your objects will be created, right? That is what initially we thought we should not create object manually. If you do that, for every user request, you will be creating a new object. Here, it will create singleton objects only. Here also it is singleton only. Means intentionally, if you try to call this method also, it won't create a double object. Singleton object only. One time only this @bean method will execute. So, correct. Object which you think it is a configuration for you. Yeah. So yeah, that's what, right. If you consider it like bean, how we are configuring our classes here, right? Same thing, same purpose, same thing is doing it here. Okay, as we are avoiding this, they given this alternate. Under configuration class, they given bean annotation to do that. Okay, so you should not. Few people will, as they don't know, this bean annotated methods they used to put inside config instead of configuration class, right? People will put under component class or somewhere in repository or service classes or controller class. They assume that it will work, but no, it will not work. It will create prototype objects. Apart from configuration class, if you put it somewhere else, it will create prototype objects instead of singleton. Okay, let's say if it is a connection pool object which is procuring. Hmm. Yes, yes. Any logic, any core Java code you can put here. Okay, any logic you can put here. It will execute only one time. This method will execute only one time in entire application lifecycle. So comfortably you can write whichever code you want. If you want to create connection here, driver manager dot get connection, you can put that logic here. If you want to create data source, you can create data source objects here. Everything like a simple core Java logic you need to put here, and you need to return that object, whichever object you want to register in Spring. You need to return that object. That's it. It will register this as a bean. This one also a bean. Now how many beans your application will have? Your controller is also a bean, service also a bean, repository is also a bean, and your component also a bean, your configuration also a bean. Under this configuration, whichever methods you implemented bean, that also it will register as a bean into IOC. Okay, so all the configurations will be placed under bean. All the configuration objects will be placed here. Okay, and the most importantly, these two combination we should use. Bean, if you observe somewhere else, remove from there and put it inside configuration only. Bean working in configuration class like a singleton, it will work like your XML file. Whenever you load into IOC container, it creates one object only, right, by default. So the same behavior it shows when you use configuration with the bean. If you use bean with the different annotations, the behavior will change. Your method will be treated like a normal method only. It will create, of course, one object, but whenever users try to intentionally call this any name method, again it will become like a normal method and it will execute this code and it will create multiple objects. So that is not good practice. Using bean with the different annotations is not a recommended practice. Bean with the configuration only we should use. Okay. So during last example, did we discuss the auto wiring? No, right? Auto wiring with annotation. Okay, that we will see. Now we will see configuration versus bean. Do you guys interested to see servlet application? I'll create one use case. Dynamic web project. So student management system. Tomcat 9 I have. Those. So I need a Tomcat server. Simple servlet application I will do. So, yeah, items. Yeah, yeah. I want to give end-to-end one example using servlet. So, okay, just leave it if it is not available. Okay, I will check it later. Okay, now I'll create a simple example on servlet's not available. Just a minute, yes, I'll just come back. Just a minute. Build path, configure build path. Yeah. Now here I need controller class. I'll create one controller package. Form dot rbu dot student management system dot web. Just consider it like this is your controller, and I'll be writing one service. I'll be having here one DAO and configurations. I'll put it under config package. Hmm. Now DAO needs connections. Okay, so that connection I'll get it from configuration class. So here I'll create one configuration class. Um, db config. You can use at the rate configuration. So here bean alternative we should provide, right? For bean using at the rate bean annotation public. I want to provide one data source here, connection pool object. Depth about data source we will discuss later, but see this create data source. One method I am creating, create DS. It will create data source object. Apache driver manager data source. No, this is Spring data source. No? Okay. What is the class name in Apache? Connection pool object. Okay. Spring data source only let's use. Driver manager data source. So it will create connection pool. Set driver class name. So you can set your driver class name here. Oracle driver connection pool dot set URL. Connection pool dot set username. Set password. So this driver manager data source is a connection pool class. It can hold only one connection. One connection pool only. One connection. This is one single connection pool. But whatever connection it will create, right, it will keep it with data source only. It will not return back to database. So your application performance is faster than fetching connection from direct database, right? Already it will create connection for you and it will make it available. Instantly whenever you use data source dot get connection, whatever connection created here, right, that connection will supply to you. Okay, this is single connection pool. There are other pool concepts we will discuss later, okay, as the concept is not to discuss about it. So a configuration I created which is data source for connections. Okay, now I need this. Yeah, data source is a one more top layer on top of your connection. Connections we will get from data source in real time. Data source will hold a list of connections, n number of connections. Connection pools we say, right? Yes, connections with database. It will hold with it. Okay. All the database connections we hold in data source. From here we can get it. Okay. So now this data source I need to auto wire into my DAO class to utilize the connection. Student to DAO which is having CRUD operations. I wanted to do save public void save student. Here inputs is giving int ID, string name. This inputs I wanted to save. To save I need a connection in my repository class. Already one bean is available. This is bean tag bean only, right? So this bean you can auto wire here. How you can auto wire? Data source, create data source reference. Earlier we used to have setter method here. So if I have set data source, I can able to call this setter method from XML file, and I can able to pass it. Now I don't have XML file here to configure it. So to avoid this manual way of dependency injection, here they given auto wired annotation. When I put auto wired annotation on top of this, I mean any variable, right? Any object, container will search for this object. Is this object is available with me or not? It will search for that object in controllers, service, web, configurations, everywhere. Inside configurations, data source object is available with bean. So anyhow, this data source object it will create and it will hold like a bean, and wherever you need it, it can auto wire it. So data source whichever is created automatically will be injected here. Auto wire will do auto dependency injection. Auto DA. Automatically your data source will be passed here. Now here you can open connection, get connection. One connection you can get, get connection. Hmm. Not returning. You can auto wire this bean anywhere. Now this bean is created like other beans only. So if we understand, right, in one class if you want to pass another class object, you can able to pass it, right, via property tag, and we using a reference we used to pass it. The same thing it will do. Yeah. So all your beans now it will register. What it will do, your IOC container will register all the beans. So how many beans it will create? In our example, we are creating one student controller with the controller annotation. So when you mention stereotype, this is one bean. Automatically this bean will be created. And the student service, this is also one bean. If I configure with @service, so this object also automatically it will create. Now repository, student DAO. When I mention @repository, this object also will be created. Now if I create one configuration class, something db config, this configuration object also will be created. So finally how many objects it will create? Your IOC will create 4 objects. Okay, your IOC will create, because it will do scanning. IOC will go to each and every package. It will scan your packages and it will identify, okay, here is a one bean, second bean, third bean, fourth bean. So 4 beans it will create. Controller object, service object, DAO object, dbconfig object. So this object is here and this object DAO object is here and your service object is here and controller object is here. And I need one more object which is connection pool object. So that you need to configure inside configuration class. Here you need to put one more configuration with the @bean. With @bean, when you specify something with a return type like data source and method, you will be having some method here, some method with your object creation logic. Whenever you mention @bean, again this one also one bean to IOC. It will create one more bean here, which is your data source. Your data source bean also created. So all these beans available to IOC now. IOC only created your data source bean, which is inside configuration class. Generally for controller only one object, service one object, repository one object. When it comes to configuration, it will create configuration object along with creating configuration object. Whatever at the rate bean methods you have here, let's say if you have 10 at the rate bean methods, so it will create that at the rate bean methods objects also here into IOC container. Now wherever you need this data source object, I need this data source object into DAO. So what you can do, simply mention that data type here, reference data source with at the rate auto wire. When you mention auto wire, it will understand your dependency. It will understand your dependency as you mentioned auto wire here. It will understand, okay, this DAO class needs data source reference. As already I have that data source here, as already data source is available here, it will pass this data source here. It will pass the data source here automatically. In case if your service required, not in case service is required, your DAO. So DAO also you can auto wire here. Auto wired student DAO. Your student DAO you can auto wire here. So this object, whatever DAO object you have, right? This object will be passed here. Your DAO object will be passed here. Now service object are required inside a controller. Student service. Put at the rate auto wired. So this object also it will be passed here. Service object is already available. So this service object it will pass from here to here. It will auto wire it. So your data source object auto wired into DAO, DAO object auto wired into service, service objects auto wired into controller. So now end-to-end connection is available. Now controller can call service method, service can call DAO methods. You guys got it right? Via auto wiring concept, whatever objects are available, that objects it automatically injects there via auto wire. Now this bean is registered into IOC data source. You can inject anywhere. So where I am injecting into DAO. From this I can get a connection. Corrections will be available inside data source. Using this connection you can create a statement or prepare statement. Write the JDBC logic here. Statement dot execute update insert into student Spring Boot microservices values. Now you can store your data here, ID, email. Finally, data will be inserted into student table. So for that we need a table, right? In database we need a table. Yeah. So I'll be creating one table in my database. ID, name, email. Yeah. So student table created. Select the star from this table. As of now, no data found. Now, when I call the save student and pass ID, name, email, right, that will be inserted into this table. Your Java application will connect with the database and it will save. Now I wanted to call this save student method from service class. DO will call by service. So I'll be having one student service class here. Just annotate service class with @service annotation. Public void create student is my business method. This method wants to call save student of DO. So as DO object is required you here to auto wire it. So you can call DO.SaveStudent method. And you need to pass ID, name, email, right? So take them as the inputs from controller. Same thing you can pass. It is throwing one exception. You can rethrow it. Now this service class create student method I need to call from controller. Student controller controller annotation auto wire student service here. Usually controller will have front end methods, right? Post, get, such methods you can have here. As of now, nothing such I am creating. Just a simple method. Consider this is like your post. Int ID, string name, string email. So from here you can call service dot create student. Rethrow it. So now all these classes objects it will create automatically by scanning. That we know. Just by scanning it will create. So the parent package name is com.rbu.sms. So here in component scan I need to put com.rbu.sms. And you know what? This one is to activate your annotation config. But in advanced Spring Boot concepts, even you don't see this XML file. This XML we will avoid, and there are few tags to avoid this XML. I mean annotations. We will see that annotations in Spring Boot concepts. Okay. For now, just go with this XML. Create a test class. Load your XML. Get your controller object. ap.getBeroff. I'm just asking IOC to give controller object. Student controller. So that I can post my data. Dot post. You can give ID, some name, email, address, and run it. Invalid username or password. Oh, this system password must be admin. Okay. System is username. Yes. We don't have any output. Okay. Add it. Just put success here. Yeah. Once everything is done, it is showing success. Internally, what it has done, it executed configuration class, DO class, service class, controller class, auto wirings happened. Finally, when I pass this data went to post method, post to service method, service to DO method. Here, this code also it executed. So finally, we got success. So here, if I see the record zeros is inserted. Okay, as expected, the code is executed. So first, which one executed, later which executed, you can see. We will put some output statements here. I'm putting some default constructor just to see which object created first. Obviously, configuration object will be created. Then you can see when this data source also created. One more record I'll insert here. See here, first your DB config object created, student DO created. Then in student DO, it understand it needs a data source object, connection pool object. So at the rate being executed. First DB config object created. Inside this DB config object, at the rate bean we have. But at the rate bean method not executed, just it loaded. When it saw student DAO needs the data source object, then data source object being created. Then that is auto wired here. It will be auto wired here into DO. Then DO object will be auto wired into service once after service object creation. Service object also will be injected into controller. Finally, auto wiring also happened success. Then only we could able to call these methods. Right? Controller should able to call your service. Service able to call DO. How these objects are available. Auto wired already. So that's the reason. End of the day, your flow able to execute. Okay. Hmm. Yes. That dependency. Hmm. Yeah, first preference in last example we saw, right? When we don't have any dependencies order, configuration only. This is normal example that we executed, right? So first it is doing config object, then DAO service, then at the rate configuration, sorry, at the rate component, configuration, DAO service, component, then controller. This is the normal order. Configuration, DAO service, component, and controller. At the rate component also we have, right? This is the order in general. In general, this is the order. So here also it did in the same way only. In our example, so in our case, if I run this, dbconfig, DAO, then data source is created. Data source configuration is there inside dbconfig only. But when that object is created at the rate bean, when it understand this DO needs that object. Otherwise, it is not even creating that at the rate bean. Yeah, yeah. So when it understand the require, yes. Once it will load into container context, na IOC it will load everything. For IOC, all these are configurations. IOC understands, okay, he needs this bean, this bean, this bean, all these beans I need to create. So it will keep all that class names and their paths. It will keep remember them. Then it will execute wherever you required, whenever you required. It will create that objects to you. And wherever you mention auto-wide, it will inject them automatically. Yeah. Okay. Any doubt here? Got it right? Yeah. Tomorrow I'll show you. Here I'll stop. Tomorrow I'll show you. Intentionally I'll try to call this method by auto-wiring dbconfig and see whether it will create duplicate connection pools or not. Generally, I mean it should not do that because it is their part of configuration class. Only one time this method will execute. Even intentionally, if you try to call repeatedly this one to break your logic also, it won't execute this method many times. Only one time it will execute. So by keeping this at the rate bean in different with the different annotations, I'll show you why you should not go with the different, component annotation or controller. People, sometimes used to confuse and put this at the rate bean in different annotation combination. That we should not do. That problem we will see tomorrow. Okay. Yeah. So once we're done with that, I'll go to JDBC ORM concepts. This weekend I'll conduct a Hibernate workshop. Okay, I'll schedule it today only. Saturday should be fine, right? Saturday, 2 hours or 3 hours workshop I'll conduct. Usually after 10 a.m., 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. like that, 10 to 1. Okay, na? So hibernate session, so that by that time JDBC concepts we finish by this Friday, right? From Monday we can see ORM concepts also, Spring ORM. Okay, yeah. So that by end of the next week we should wrap up this, concepts, ORM concepts, AOP concepts, so that we can jump into MVC. 2 days after covering MVC, we will start Spring Boot and microservices. Again, more focus is required there. Okay. So from here we can play with actual end-to-end examples. More realization you will get here. Okay. That's it for today. Okay. Yeah, we'll connect 8:40 tomorrow. And I we thought of change this timing also, no? So I'll try to just prepone 10-15 minutes before. Okay, 8:20 or 8:15 we will start. That I'll try to do from Thursday or from next Monday. Okay. Yeah. So that's all for today. Okay.